My stepdaughter called me selfish for not giving her the vacation house. I reminded her who paid for her college, her first car, even her therapy bills when her real dad bailed. She rolled her eyes and said, "All that doesn't make you my real dad." What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Doris Germain. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I used to believe that love, if given freely and consistently enough, could fill in the gaps someone else left behind. I wasn't trying to be a hero when I stepped into her life. I just loved her mother. But when you fall in love with a woman who's carrying the heartbreak of a child abandoned by her father, you don't get to love one without trying to heal the other. So I tried. God knows I tried. From the moment she was 7 and looked at me with wary eyes that scanned for disappointment, I was hooked. I showed up to every parent-teacher conference. I learned how to braid her hair after YouTube tutorials and more than a few bad tries. I bought her first car, used but clean. And I was there when she graduated, both high school and college. Every milestone, I clapped the loudest. And for years, I thought it meant something. That maybe love earned was stronger than blood abandoned. So when she called me selfish, it wasn't just a word. It was a verdict. It was a dismissal of every late-night ER visit, every tuition payment, every tear I wiped that should have been her real dad's job. The irony was bitter. I'd said no to giving her the vacation house, and suddenly everything I'd done was erased. "It's not like you even go anymore," she said, waving her hand like the house I built from scratch was some meaningless toy gathering dust. I kept my voice steady. I told her that wasn't the point. That house was mine. I paid for every square foot, every nail and screw, every hour of overtime that made it possible. And more than that, it was the one place I felt peace. Solitude. A place that hadn't been pulled into the vortex of her growing entitlement. She stood there in my kitchen, arms crossed, eyes sharp and smug. "You always say you love me like your own," she said, "but when it really matters, you don't show it." That's when I reminded her. I listed it all: college, car, therapy. I didn't do it to guilt her, though maybe part of me hoped she'd flinch, even just a little. Instead, she rolled her eyes. "All that doesn't make you my real dad," she said, each word like a slap I didn't see coming. The silence that followed was heavy, like the space between two people on opposite cliffs who finally realize there's no bridge left between them. "I see," I said. "That's all." I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just walked out of the room before I said something I couldn't take back. But inside, my heart felt like a balloon with a slow leak. No pop, no drama, just a slow collapse of something that once held so much air, so much hope. I sat in the garage for almost an hour, staring at the boxes I still hadn't unpacked from our last trip to the lake. I thought about how she used to beg to go there when she was younger. "Let's make s'mores, Daddy," she'd say, tugging at my sleeve. Back then, I believed we were building something real. Turns out, I was the only one laying bricks. Later that night, my wife came to me, her face stiff with the usual discomfort she wore whenever her daughter crossed a line. "You know how she gets," she said gently, as if minimizing the damage would somehow make me forget the blow. She didn't mean it. I looked at her for a long time before speaking. She meant it enough to say it. That's all I need to know. She sighed and didn't push, but I could tell she wanted to. She always did make excuses for the girl she swore she raised right. But the truth is, we didn't raise her together. I did the lifting while she played referee. And now, that imbalance had a voice. A loud, entitled voice asking for a house she never helped build. I stayed quiet the rest of the evening. Didn't eat. Didn't watch TV. Just sat in my study, staring at the family photos lined on the shelf. One in particular caught my eye, her high school graduation. Me in a stiff suit, her beaming in blue robes, my arm around her like it belonged there. Back then, if someone had told me that same girl would one day sneer at my love like it was some charity she tolerated, I would have called them bitter. But time has a way of revealing what love alone can't fix. And sometimes, the hardest pill to swallow is the one that tells you, you were never really part of the story the way you thought. The next morning, she texted me, "If you don't want to give me the house, just say so." No need to throw all your generosity in my face. I stared at the message for a full minute before locking my phone. That was the moment I knew. She didn't just undervalue what I gave, she resented it. Saw it as leverage, not love. And once someone views your sacrifices as currency, the relationship's already bankrupt. I didn't respond. I didn't owe her an explanation, but I did owe myself peace. And maybe, for once, it was time I gave myself a gift, one I'd never had the courage to unwrap before. I never asked her to call me Dad. That came on its own, unexpected and quietly monumental, one summer morning when she was about 9. We were fixing the broken leg on her Barbie's playhouse, and out of nowhere she said it, soft, like she wasn't sure it would stick. Thanks, Dad. I didn't breathe for a second. My heart stopped. I didn't want to make a big deal of it, so I kept my eyes on the screwdriver, but inside, I swear, a new part of me came alive, like I had finally stepped into something real. I told myself then that love didn't need blood to make a bond. It just needed presence, consistency, care, the kind of patience only someone who truly wants to be there can give. I thought I had earned the title, not taken it. Earned it. But lately, it was clear, she was revising history, erasing chapters she no longer found useful, especially the ones with me in them. Her real dad, Alan, was a ghost even when he was breathing. The man was smooth, tall, charming, full of promises he never planned to keep. When I met my wife, Alan was already a footnote, a blurry figure who showed up on birthdays with half-hearted gifts and left just enough presents to keep his title intact. He never paid child support on time. He didn't attend a single parent conference. And when his daughter hit puberty and started spiraling from the confusion of it all, he vanished. One year, he promised to take her to Disneyland. She packed her bag, waited by the door for 5 hours, and cried herself to sleep on the couch. I sat with her the whole time, unsure how to explain that a man can father a child and still not know how to love one. When she needed therapy after that, I found the best counselor we could afford. Weekly sessions, hundreds of dollars a month, for over 2 years. I never blinked at the bill. I wanted her to understand none of this was her fault. That she wasn't broken, just abandoned by someone too selfish to see her worth. But abandonment does strange things to a child's mind. It creates this twisted fantasy that maybe the person who left was just misunderstood. That the parent who stayed, the one doing the heavy lifting, is the villain because they remind you of reality. I became that reminder. I was the constant, the stable one. And somehow, stability is easy to overlook when you've grown used to chasing chaos. The shift started slowly. When she went off to college, the phone calls came less often. She stopped calling me Dad and started using my first name when introducing me to friends. "This is Paul," she'd say casually, like I was her mom's plus one. I didn't say anything at first. I told myself it was just a phase, college independence, a need to create space. But over time, her distance became sharper, deliberate. She stopped asking about my work. She'd visit for holidays, but keep her headphones in during dinner, texting under the table. When I tried to engage, she gave short, clipped answers, or that signature eye roll she inherited from her mother. I started feeling like a guest in my own home when she was around. One Thanksgiving, she showed up with a boyfriend no one had ever met. Didn't ask, didn't warn us. Just walked in the door, dropped her bags, and said, "This is Trevor. He's staying the week." My wife and I exchanged looks, but said nothing. I tried to make conversation, asked him about his work, his family. He shrugged and said, "I'm between jobs right now. Just vibing." That week, I paid for dinner every night, refilled the pantry twice, and cleaned up after them while they binge-watched shows in the living room. The moment they left, she sent a group text thanking her mother for everything. I didn't even get a name check. I think what hurt the most wasn't her forgetting. It was her rewriting, turning me into some man who just happened to be there. Like all those years of sacrifice were part of some invisible transaction she never signed off on. But I wasn't doing it for thanks. I did it because I loved her. I loved her the way you love someone who depends on you to survive. And now that she no longer needed me, she acted like I had imposed that love against her will. "Why are you taking this so personally?" she asked once, when I finally confronted her after another cold interaction. "You were just doing what any decent man would do." That stung more than I expected. "Any decent man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. So what does that make Alan? She shrugged. He had his issues. You don't need to compare yourself to him. And just like that, she'd erased the gulf between us. Turned a man who never showed up into someone I was just competing with. I realized then I wasn't just losing my place in her life. I was being actively edited out of it. A few weeks before the vacation house argument, she sent me a casual text. Hey, what's the title status on the lake property? No greeting. No small talk. Just that. Like she was checking on a shipment. I replied that it was still under my name. She said, would be nice if you passed it on before taxes hit harder next year. No, please. No, would you consider? Just entitlement. Assumption. As if my years of providing had somehow morphed into a debt I still owed. That was when I knew this wasn't just about a house. It was about what I represented to her. A resource. A stepping stone. Not a father. I sat in the lake house the weekend after that text. Just me and the silence. It was cold, the heat barely working, but I didn't mind. I needed the quiet. I walked the rooms, touched the walls I painted myself years ago. Every corner held a memory. Her running in with scraped knees, us fixing a leaky faucet together, my wife reading a novel on the back porch. That place was sacred. Mine. And for the first time, I saw clearly. She didn't want it because it meant something to her. She wanted it because it was valuable. Because taking it would be easy. That's when the seed of the letter planted itself in my head. I didn't act on it yet, but I knew. Something had to change. I couldn't keep playing the role of father to someone who only saw me as the man who filled in the blanks until her fantasy father decided to show up. And if that day ever came, she could go to him for the house, the support, the love. I had nothing left to give. The kitchen confrontation didn't happen with shouting, slamming doors, or raised voices. That would have at least felt honest. Instead, it was that eerie calm. The kind that settles right before the storm breaks, when everyone's pretending not to hear the thunder in each other's chests. She had come over under the guise of dinner. My wife cooked lasagna, the way she always did when she wanted to pretend we were still a close-knit family. The kind of dinner where she lights a candle in the center of the table and plays soft jazz in the background, like ambience could paper over the emotional decay sitting between us. I knew something was coming the moment my stepdaughter walked in. She didn't bring a bottle of wine like she used to. Didn't kiss her mother on the cheek or ask how work was going. She walked in, sat down, and waited, calculating, like a lawyer prepping her opening statement. Halfway through dinner, just as I reached for the breadbasket, she struck. So, she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. What's your long-term plan with the lake house? My fork paused midair. My wife blinked. I let the question hang, just long enough to give her a chance to retract it. She didn't. I set the fork down slowly and looked at her. My plan is to keep it. Why? She shrugged, sipping from her water glass like it was wine. I just think it would make more sense if it was in my name now. We all know you barely go up there anymore. It's just sitting there. There it was. Entitlement, fully bloomed. I stared at her, waiting for some kind of grin, a wink, anything to signal that this was a joke. But her face was stone. My wife looked from me to her and back again, clearly blindsided but unwilling to intervene. That was her pattern, silent until the conflict peaked. I took a deep breath. That house is mine, I said, voice even. It's not some unused storage unit. It's where I go when I need to breathe. She rolled her eyes, and that one small gesture, it nearly undid me. That lazy dismissal, like my attachment was silly, dramatic. Come on, she said. You're not exactly roughing it day to day. You live comfortably. Why are you clinging to this one thing like it's sacred? I clenched my jaw. Because I built it, I said. I saved for years. I worked overtime shifts. I missed weekends and sleep and peace to make that house a reality. It's mine. She leaned back, folding her arms. And I'm just saying, if you really considered me family, it would matter more that it stays in the family than that you keep it under your name. You act like I'm some stranger asking for a handout. I snapped then, not loud, but something in me cracked. Don't you dare talk to me about family when you've spent the last 5 years treating me like I'm the hired help. My wife gasped softly, but I ignored her. You want the house? Fine. Let's take inventory. Who paid for your tuition when your dad disappeared? Who bought your first car? Who covered your therapy bills when he stood you up for the 3rd Christmas in a row? Who stayed when you screamed and slammed doors and tested every boundary I set because you didn't know what to do with your grief. My voice trembled, not with rage, but with exhaustion. Don't lecture me about family. I was your family, until you decided I wasn't. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She tilted her head and said, with the same ice that had begun to define her, "All that doesn't make you my real dad." The room fell silent. My wife looked like she'd been slapped. I felt hollow, not angry, empty, like I'd been gutted and hadn't even realized it until now. I stood slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and nodded. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't." I walked out of the room before I could break something or say something I couldn't take back. But my mind was already racing ahead. Because when someone shows you who they are, you can't keep clinging to who they used to be. That girl who once clutched my hand during a thunderstorm, who left me sticky notes in my lunchbox that said, "Best dad ever," she was gone. Replaced by a woman who saw love as leverage and generosity as currency. I spent that night in the guest room, doors shut, scrolling through old pictures on my phone like a fool trying to find proof that it had all been real. There she was, sitting on my shoulders at a carnival, smiling up at me from the hood of her first car, hugging me at her college graduation with tears in her eyes. I kept looking for signs, any hint that this current version of her was an imposter. But I realized then that those moments were real. They just didn't buy me anything now. They didn't mean loyalty. They didn't mean permanence. They were just snapshots in a life she had already rewritten. The next morning, she was gone. My wife told me she needed time to cool off. I didn't argue. I went to the bank. I made calls. I sat in a notary's office and signed a letter that had been forming in the back of my mind for months, long before this argument gave it a name. It was clean, factual, emotionally detached. A formal declaration that I would no longer be providing financial support, that I was withdrawing from any expectations of inheritance or continued involvement. A final gift, one could say. I mailed it that afternoon, and I waited. It felt strange, how quiet everything became after I dropped the envelope in the mailbox. No thunder, no catharsis, just the mechanical click of the metal flap closing and the sound of my own breath on the walk back to my truck. I had imagined I'd feel lighter, maybe even vindicated, but all I felt was cold. That dense kind of chill that doesn't come from the weather, but from the finality of knowing you've crossed a line you can't uncross. Still, I didn't second-guess it. I had spent years giving, bending, proving. The letter wasn't revenge, it was relief. A declaration of emotional bankruptcy. I couldn't carry her sense of entitlement anymore. I couldn't keep bleeding for someone who only ever noticed me when she needed something. It was 2 pages, typed. Not cruel, not dramatic, just firm. I started by saying I had loved her like my own, and that everything I did, every dollar, every hour, every compromise, had come from a place of wanting her to feel whole. I acknowledged that her father's absence had left a wound I could never fully heal, and that I had spent much of her childhood trying to patch that hole with presence, affection, and security. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's servitude. And I had finally realized I had crossed the line from being supportive to being used. I included specific things. I would no longer be providing financial assistance of any kind. I would not be leaving her the vacation house in my will. And I would be removing her from any legal ties related to my estate. I am not doing this to punish you, I wrote. I am doing this to protect myself, to reclaim my peace. I ended the letter with one final gesture, a check for $1. Not because I thought she needed it, but because I wanted there to be no confusion. One last gift, one last transaction, symbolic but binding. When she called 3 days later, her voice was small. I almost didn't recognize it. "I got your letter," she said. I didn't respond. I waited. She sniffled on the other end. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." Still, I said nothing. Look, I was upset. I didn't mean what I said about you not being my real dad. But we both knew she did. It wasn't just a heat of the moment jab. It was the truth she'd been sitting on for years, finally weaponized because I wouldn't hand over what she felt entitled to. I didn't need her to walk it back. I needed her to live with it. "I don't know why you're being so cruel," she continued. "You of all people should know how hard it's been for me." That's when I spoke. "You're not a child anymore," I said. "You don't get to play the abandonment card every time someone holds you accountable." Her silence was deafening. I could hear her breathing, shaky and unsure. I have been your father in every way that matters, I added, but I will not continue being your scapegoat, your wallet, or your emotional punching bag. She hung up. 2 days later, she showed up at my front door. No warning. My wife was in the garden, and I heard the doorbell ring while I was upstairs sorting through old paperwork. I came down and opened the door to find her standing there, tears streaming, eyes swollen. She held the letter in one hand, wrinkled and folded like she'd been clutching it for days. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "I was wrong, okay? I was just angry. You can't really mean to cut me off like this." I leaned against the doorframe. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at her, this grown woman who once called me daddy with such innocence, now pleading with a man she had reduced to a title she didn't respect. "It's not about the house," I said finally. "It's not even about the money. It's about the fact that I have begged for years to be seen. Not for what I could provide, but for who I am. And every time you had a chance to make me feel like your father, you reminded me that I wasn't." She cried harder then, mascara running, her voice catching in her throat. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know what I needed from you, and I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter. I nodded slowly. But I did matter, and you chose not to see that. And now, I'm choosing not to keep fighting for a place in your life that you clearly don't want me to have. She reached for me. "Please, just talk to Mom. Don't make this permanent." "I'll do better, I swear." But I stepped back. "I'm not doing this for your mother. I'm doing this for me. Because if I keep trying to earn your love, I'm going to lose myself. And I'm done being a fool." I shut the door softly, not slammed, not in anger, but with finality. I didn't watch her walk away. I didn't peek through the blinds. I just stood in the hallway for a long time, breathing, feeling something shift inside me. Not guilt, not sadness, just quiet. That evening, my wife came in from the garden, dirt under her fingernails, and asked if she had imagined seeing our daughter crying on the porch. I told her no. I told her I'd said what I needed to say. She didn't argue, didn't defend. She simply nodded, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. The part of her that wanted peace, and the part of her that finally understood what loving someone like that had cost me. Later that night, I poured a glass of bourbon, sat out on the back porch, and watched the sun disappear behind the trees. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't waiting. Not waiting for appreciation. Not waiting for apologies. Just still. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Whether she'd keep trying to reach out or finally let me go. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to lose her. Because maybe I already had. It didn't take long for the calls to start again. First a few texts, each one colder than the last, like she was trying on different tones to see which one might work. "I still can't believe you're choosing this hill to die on." Then, "I hope your ego's worth more than your family." And finally, "Guess this just proves you were never really my dad." I read them all, didn't reply. I knew she was trying to bait me, guilt me back into position. But I'd already stepped off the merry-go-round. I wasn't spinning in circles anymore. I had drawn a boundary, and for the first time in my life, I intended to keep it. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was pressure. My wife tiptoed around the house like we were mourning someone, flinching every time the doorbell rang or the phone buzzed. She didn't say much, but I could see the unease brewing behind her eyes, like she was waiting for the explosion we both knew was coming. And it came, exactly 1 week after the letter. A voicemail, frantic and unhinged, left at 2:13 a.m. "I can't believe you," she sobbed into the receiver. "You really meant it. You actually meant it. I thought you were bluffing. I thought you were just trying to teach me a lesson, but you're disgusting, Paul. You're disgusting. You're cutting me off like I'm some stranger? After everything? You told me you loved me. You told me I was your daughter. What kind of father does this?" I listened to the message in full, twice. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because I needed to feel it. To absorb every syllable and remind myself why I'd made this choice. Her voice cracked halfway through the recording, morphing from fury into fear. "Please," she said near the end. "I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. I was just hurt. I didn't know you were serious. Please, just talk to me. Please." I deleted the message. Not out of cruelty, but because I refused to let it live on my phone as some kind of emotional hostage. My wife asked if I wanted to talk about it. I told her no. What I didn't say was that part of me had been waiting for that breakdown, expecting it, almost hoping for it. Because when someone finally realizes the well has run dry, they either learn how to dig their own, or they start blaming you for the drought. 2 days later, she came back. Not alone this time, she brought her husband, Trevor. The same smug, jobless boyfriend she'd once paraded through my house like a trophy. He stood on my front porch like he had any authority to speak on family matters, arms crossed, chin high, like this was some negotiation. My wife opened the door before I could stop her. The minute I saw him, my chest tightened. He wasn't here to fix anything. He was here to posture. And sure enough, it didn't take long. "We're just here to talk," he said, stepping inside like we'd invited him. There's clearly been some miscommunication, and I think it's only fair that I cut him off. "You don't get a say in this." He raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said, voice flat. "This isn't between you and me. This is between me and the woman who used to call me Dad." She stepped forward then, looking smaller than usual, like she was folding in on herself. "I just wanted to come in person and apologize." Again, I nodded. "Okay." She blinked, clearly thrown by my calm. "I'm sorry I said those things. I was angry and scared, and I didn't mean to hurt you." I waited, but she hesitated. "But I think you're overreacting. I was wrong, yes, but cutting me out entirely? That's abandonment." Trevor jumped in. "It's actually a form of emotional abuse. Using money and inheritance to punish someone for having feelings." "Shut up," I said, calm but sharp. "You don't get to weaponize psychology against me. Not after watching me pay her way through life without so much as a thank you." She started crying again. Loud, performative sobs that bounced off the walls like accusations. "I just want my family back," she said. "I want things to go back to normal." I felt a pang then, not regret, but something adjacent. The echo of a man who used to want the same thing. But normal was a lie. Normal was me swallowing disappointment for years and calling it love. Normal was being punished for not being her father and ignored when I acted like one. "You don't get to hurt someone and then demand access to their life," I said softly. "I forgave you 100 times without hearing the words. This time, I need space. Maybe forever." She dropped to her knees. "Right there, in the living room. Please, Paul. Please don't do this. I'll change. I swear. I'll go to therapy again. I'll fix it." Trevor stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable now. "Babe, come on, let's go." I just stood there, unmoved. This isn't about changing. This is about accepting consequences. She looked up at me, mascara smudged, breath uneven. "You really mean it? You're really done?" I nodded. "I'm really done." She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She just broke. Quietly. Something inside her seemed to fracture, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the scared little girl I had once tried so hard to protect. And it almost worked. It almost pulled me back in. But I knew better now. That part of me, the one that rescued, enabled, forgave, had died the day she looked me in the face and said, "You're not my real dad." She left without another word. Trevor guided her out like a nurse escorting a patient. My wife didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at the door. Finally, she whispered, "That was a lot." I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Later that night, I went to the lake house alone. The drive was long and silent, and the moment I stepped inside, I dropped to the floor and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was free. The lake house looked the same as it always had, untouched, quiet, still holding the ghost of happier times. But something about it felt different that weekend. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe it was just me. I set my overnight bag on the same old bench by the door, the one she used to curl up on while waiting for marshmallows to roast. The air smelled of pine and memory, and for a long moment I stood there doing nothing at all, just listening to the wind whisper against the windows and the creak of the floor settling beneath me. It was my place again. Fully mine. Not just in deed or paper, but in soul. I didn't cry because I was grieving her. I cried because I had finally let go of a fantasy I'd held onto for far too long. The idea that love, unconditional and relentless, could undo someone else's brokenness. That if I just gave enough time, money, forgiveness, she'd wake up one day and see me as her father again. But she hadn't. And maybe she never had. Maybe I was just the stand-in, the provider, the man who was always around but never quite enough to fill the vacancy her real dad left behind. That truth used to keep me up at night. Now, it just sat beside me like an old friend, unwelcome, but no longer feared. The day after her last visit, my wife asked if I would consider reopening the door. She didn't demand. She didn't plead. She just sat beside me on the porch swing and asked softly, "Do you think she meant it this time? That she really wants to change?" I turned to her, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel that familiar pang of guilt when she asked me to compromise. I simply said, "It doesn't matter." Because it didn't. Even if she changed, even if she saw the error in her ways, I couldn't undo what years of dismissal and manipulation had done to me. I couldn't erase the moments where I begged silently to be seen, to be appreciated, and got nothing but an eye roll in return. "She's still your daughter," my wife said. But it didn't sting this time. I nodded. "She is. But she's not my responsibility anymore." That answer ended the conversation. Not in anger, but in quiet understanding. My wife didn't push further. I think, in her own way, she finally saw how deep the wound went. How much it cost me to keep pretending we were still a family that functioned. I spent the next few days at the lake house alone. I walked the trails, fixed the broken latch on the shed, cooked for one. I didn't answer any texts. I didn't check email. I just let myself exist, without expectation, without performance. And in that space, I realized something that changed everything. My love for her had been real, but it had also been codependent. I gave and gave because I was afraid that if I stopped, she'd finally prove me right, that I wasn't really her father in her eyes. And when she did, it shattered the illusion. But it also freed me. She sent one final message while I was gone. Just one line. "If this is really goodbye, I hope you know I did love you in my own way." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no apology, no ownership, just a parting gift wrapped in ambiguity. But I didn't need it. I didn't need anything from her anymore. I didn't reply. I archived the message and turned off my phone. That was my last gift to her. Silence. No retaliation. No bitterness. Just space. The cleanest break I could offer. I drove home a few days later and put the letter she returned, crumpled and tear-stained, into a file folder labeled Final Documents. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I just needed somewhere to place the weight of that moment. Somewhere it could live without haunting me. My wife didn't ask how the trip went. She just looked at me as I unpacked and nodded slowly, like she saw something new in my face. Something settled. From that point on, we didn't talk about her much. Not because we didn't care, but because we had both accepted the loss in our own way. My wife cried alone in the bathroom sometimes. I heard her. I never went in. She needed that space, just like I had needed mine. Some wounds don't heal together. They scar in different directions. And life moved on. I spent more time at the lake. Started teaching myself woodworking again. I reconnected with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. I cooked Sunday dinners just for the two of us and stopped setting a third plate out of habit. My heart didn't harden, it just got smarter, wiser. I stopped mistaking tolerance for love and silence for peace. I think what surprised me most was how many people quietly understood. Friends who said nothing for years suddenly reached out, sharing their own stories of estranged kids, of ungrateful stepchildren, of love that was never reciprocated. And in those conversations, I found something like healing. Not absolution, but solidarity. Proof that I wasn't alone in letting go of someone I once would have died for. If she ever decides to become a different person. One who owns her choices, who sees people not as what they can offer, but who they truly are, I won't stand in the way of that journey. But I won't be part of it either. Not unless she starts from scratch. Not unless she earns it. The last gift I ever gave her wasn't money. It wasn't the house. It wasn't even the letter. It was freedom. Hers and mine. The freedom to start over, separately. Without obligation. Without resentment. And that, I think, is the purest kind of love. One that finally stops hurting. If you've ever been the one who gave everything, only to be told you were never enough, this story is for you. Let me know in the comments. Where do you draw the line between love and obligation? And if you've ever had to cut ties to protect your peace, I want to hear your story. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this one hit close to home. See you soon in the next story.